AFIO Now is presented by Northwest Financial Advisors, where our world revolves around you.
Hello, everyone. This is Jim Hughes with AFIO Now. We are a program of recorded interviews with former senior U.S. intelligence officers. And today I'm privileged to have a very interesting guest. His name is John Gentry. He teaches at Missouri State University. He's also an adjunct professor at Georgetown. For 12 years, he was an analyst at CIA, working primarily on economic affairs for the former Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact. 2 years, he was the senior analyst working for the National Intelligence Office for Warning. He's a retired reserve officer with a background primarily in special operations and intelligence. In 1996, he was deployed to Bosnia. He has a PhD in political science from George Washington University, and he has a very thought-provoking book out called Strategic Warning Intelligence, which I have read and thoroughly enjoyed. John, welcome to AFIO Now.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate the invitation.
John, in your book, you talk about the paradox of warning. What is that?
Paradox of warning is a distinct phenomenon of the warning business. It's a situation in which warning analysts, getting good collection information, provide warnings to senior decision makers who act in ways that deter the warned about event, which makes the warned about event and the warning look to be inaccurate. So it's an unusual case in which excellent warning looks like a failure. The only variety of any kind of intelligence analysis where this occurs.
John, in your book, you draw out 4 different case studies of classic history of warning. Could you elaborate on that for our audience, please?
Certainly. The book in chapter 2 has 4 case studies that individually provide
A great many warning lessons, and together comprise many of the lessons that warning analysts need to know and have learned over time. The first of them was the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941. This was an excellent case of German deception. The Soviets, for their part, failed the warning mission for a number of reasons, mainly because Soviet leader Stalin refused to accept the many warning messages that he received. He showed a number of biases related to unwillingness to accept the word even of non-communist agents, and he simply made a number of analytic errors himself. This is a great example of why senior leaders should not be their own intelligence analysts. The second case was the D-Day invasion of June of 1944. In this case, the Allies, particularly Great Britain, designed a massive and highly successful effort to defeat German warning. In this case, the British used counterintelligence assets. They used SIGINT. They exploited the biases of German leaders, particularly Hitler, who thought that the Allies would surely do the same things that he would do. So the Allies picked Lieutenant General George Patton, who Hitler liked, to run a notional first U.S. Army group, the FUSAG. So it was an excellent case of deception that defeated not bad warning. Traditionally, intelligence analysts have thought that German intelligence was not very good. But as you recall, Jim, Nigel West has been on your program and indicated that the Abwehr was actually considerably better than the conventional wisdom has been. So the Allies, again, particularly the British, did an excellent job of defeating a warning mechanism. The third case study was the Egyptian surprise against Israel in October of 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. Here the warning failure on the Israelis' part is particularly surprising because the Israelis had excellent collection, but they became convinced that the war plan that they had received in the 1970 roughly period remained in effect. This became known as a concept. It was originally a good war plan that became simply an assumption. and the Israelis did not change their views as time went on and as they received additional information. And they ended up simply being very, very badly surprised by a clever and time-consuming process by the Egyptians. This was a very, very difficult experience for the Israelis, and they still talk in hushed and surprised terms about that case. The fourth case that we wrote about was the National Intelligence Estimate of October of 1990 called Yugoslavia Transformed. This was a national intelligence estimate, which, as intelligence aficionados know, is normally an assessment of an aggregate situation, but it also was, in this case, a warning document. It warned about the demise of the state of Yugoslavia. It accurately predicted what would happen. The interesting thing in this case is that even though the NIE as an assessment and as a warning document was unusually accurate, that the George H.W. Bush administration did essentially nothing to respond to it. So they accepted it, but they did not do anything to respond. There were several reasons for this. The administration was preoccupied with putting together a coalition to liberate Kuwait, which happened, of course, in 1991. They were worried about the collapsing Soviet Union and the spread of nuclear weapons. They thought Yugoslavia was a European problem. And perhaps most importantly, the NIE said there was very little that the U.S. government could do about it. So the government took them at their word and didn't do very much. Now, whether something might have happened, might have been able to be done about the collapse of Yugoslavia is another question. But the great lesson here is that even a fine warning message will not generate action if it's not persuasive. So those are our four cases.
John, what are some examples of different kinds of warning institutions?
There are at least 5 of them that I've been able to identify. The first is one I referred to earlier, the situation in which there's a single national leader who is his own intelligence analyst and makes his own warning-related decisions. This is a not efficient.
It's made serious. Second one is what's called a separate warning in states in the Watch Committee, which existed in the 1960s. And in this case, a warning institution has considerable authority, considerable power. In the Watch Committee's case, it had access to the White House and was generally widely respected. The downside of that system is that it's not well connected to analysts in the community as a whole. A third variety is what we call every analyst a warning analyst. This is a situation in which intelligence agencies will tell all of their analysts that in addition to their other responsibilities, writing current intelligence and other things, that they're responsible for identifying warning issues and passing warning messages on to senior officials. That is a system that we have now in the United States. And is, I think, a problem because there's not a central authority, a central locus of warning messages, who's got the bureaucratic clout to go to the White House and say, we have an issue, Mr. President, or to whomever. A fourth variety is what I call a hybrid, which is the last two situations combined. So you have a warning institution which has responsibility for providing senior level warning messages, that is responsible for developing warning methods, and also is watching the community of analysts as a whole and encouraging them to do warning analysts. This is the situation that we had in the United States from 1979 to 2011, when we had the NIO for warning, the National Intelligence Officer for warning, a senior level warning dedicated person. And the fifth one is a relatively new institution that I think is best called the whole of government warning institution. This occurs in a few countries around the world, all of which are small. Singapore is the best example that I know of. In this case, you have
small government agencies that can work together pretty well, pretty closely, and look for issues of importance to the government as a whole on a worldwide basis.
John, what has been the history of warning in the United States?
Well, we've had a checkered history, or an up and down history, if you will. Perhaps the greatest warning failure in American history occurred on the 7th of December of 1941, the Japanese attack. And as many people know, the Central Intelligence Agency was created in response to that warning failure. The warning mission became important and was highly regarded in the late 1940s into the 50s as a result of the emergence of the Cold War. We were concerned about the possibility of a Soviet nuclear strike, of invasion of Western Europe, and warning was seen as a way to help prepare and to alert the country, and then later on NATO, to the emergence of this kind of threat. So as time went on, though, there were ups and downs. So high respect and authority of the warning missions in the 40s and 50s, lots of resources, good people. In the 1960s, with the advent of the Vietnam War, the warning mission went away. Focus went to the tactical war in Vietnam. In the early 1970s, warning fell further in status and interest because the détente era of the time led people to think, well, if the main Soviet threat is going away, the Soviets are being friendly, then we don't need a warning from that complacence tended to largely end in the late 1970s when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. This was the time, 1979, as I mentioned, when the National Intelligence Officer for Warning position was created. In the post-Soviet period, the status and willingness to fund warning went down again. The Soviet threat went away, and when it went down again after the 2001 attacks, the warning was seen as not being relevant to the terrorist mission. And finally, in 2011, apparently for all of these reasons and perhaps for some more, Director of National Intelligence Jim Clapper abolished the NIO for warning position. So we do not any longer have in the United States a centralized warning institution.
John, compare and contrast for our audience the systems in the U.S. and in the UK.
Certainly. We have a larger and again, institutionally changed situation, as I mentioned. In the United States at the moment, since we do not have a national level warning function, the military warning function is handled by the combatant commands. So within the Defense Department, warning is heavily a military function. In the United Kingdom, we have a different arrangement. The mission there, warning mission there, is handled by Defense Intelligence. That's the Defense Analytic Organization associated with the British Defense Ministry. It works military warning mainly. Another very important part of the British system is the Joint Intelligence Committee, or the JIC. This is an organization that was established in 1936 by the three military services. Over time, it has evolved into a largely civilian organization that works for the Cabinet Office of the Prime Minister. It's roughly, in my mind anyway, it's roughly an equivalent to the National Security Council staff. And so what we have, since intelligence is being done in that, is that you have, in essence, the rough American analogy. You have roughly the President's Daily Brief staff appended to the National Security Council staff. And so in this situation, you have intelligence officers who are working very closely with persons from policy-making departments. So you have warning and other kinds of intelligence being done in a joint intelligence and policy kind of a way. So you end up having national estimates instead of intelligence estimates, the way we have here in the United States. So it has a real strength, I believe, in the sense that it makes intelligence and the policy community tightly linked. You don't have problems of what we would call in the United States consumer-producer relations. The other other major aspect, though, is that the British intelligence community as a whole is much, much smaller than we have in the United States. So their capacity to do intelligence and to do warning intelligence is less than we have here.
John, what are some examples of warning methodologies?
Well, there are a number of these as well. Some lessons I think that we have. There are two general types of ways of looking at and approaching strategic warning intelligence. The first one is something that is idiosyncratic, that we really can't predict terribly well. The Defense Department now calls these emerging warning issues. When I was an analyst in the 1980s, the director of the intelligence director at Bob Gates used to tell us that our job was to look over the horizon for things that policymakers do not yet know will one day concern them greatly. So this meant then that we were tasked with being imaginative and coming up with all kinds of insightful ways of looking at the world. So there's no real method to this approach. Intelligence, native intelligence, expertise, imagination, a little bit of skepticism, and some other personal characteristics are important in this respect. The second major category is what the Defense Department now calls enduring warning problems. So these are ones that we know exist and have existed for a while, are likely to exist in the future. So think of a historical case. We were worried about the Soviet invasion of Western Europe during the Cold War. That was an enduring warning problem. We were looking for threats. There is a standard method now that we use and some other countries use in slightly different ways to handle this. This is known as the indications and warning method, sometimes called a technique. It really is a structured analytic technique, or a SAT, for those interested in that kind of analytic help. So in this case, you have a basic approach in which you identify a warning problem, an issue, or an end state, as it's known in the Defense Department now. You do research, you look for methods, you look for ways in which the warned about event might occur. You identify indications that might suggest that one or more of your scenarios are likely to occur. And you develop then indicators, do collection, making a warning message if it is warranted. Key here is research, discipline, development of expertise about your warning problem. There are some more narrow lessons that I would suggest are important that we see repeatedly in the literature, and these are a few of them are paying attention to what foreign actors, intelligence targets are thinking. So one of the mistakes that's been made many a time is for warning analysts to look at an objective situation and presume that foreign actors are going to respond to the situation as opposed to doing what they think about the situation. So a classic example of that is the mistake that even the Soviets recognized, the mistake of Soviet leader Khrushchev, who initiated the missile crisis in Cuba in 1962. This was a big mistake on his part by Soviet standards, and he ended up being relieved of duty in 1964 for having threatened the Soviet Union in the view of fellow Politburo members. So watch for what intelligence targets are thinking, not just assessing the situations in which they exist. Another important thing domestically is making sure that prospective warning consumers know about the capabilities, the limitations of the warning function. So the educating consumer function is always an intelligence role. It's especially important for the warning business, and it's especially important for warning people to understand their immediate consumers because accepting warning messages is sometimes very difficult. It can involve acceptance of the necessity to make decisions that are unpleasant. And we know that sometimes decision makers will simply put off making that kind of a decision. So it's very important for warning officers to understand the psychological makeup of their key consumers. Another important lesson, thing to remember, is that warning intelligence is a special intelligence function. It is not current intelligence. We've seen a situation in the past, in many cases actually, particularly during the Vietnam period, in which warning units were basically transferred into current intelligence shops, which basically destroys the warning capacity. And then a final one, at least for discussion here, is time. It's critically important that all warning messages be issued in adequate time for decision makers to act. And there are really three components to time in this model, if you will. The first one is that decision makers need time to decide that they actually do need to make a decision. So this is an internalization process. Secondly, if they decide to make a decision, then they need to put their desire to normal governmental decision-making processes, which takes time. And then the third element is the time that it takes to implement the actions that policymakers make. So if this is a diplomatic démarche, for example, time can be relatively short, but if it's sending a significant military force or halfway around the world, it could be a long time. So the warning analyst needs to make an assessment of all three of these varieties of time and back up the warning message to the point where decision makers have an adequate amount of time to deter, head off, defend against the prospective warned about events.
In light of that, John, what is an optimal warning time frame?
That's a very good question, and it is one that is very much debated. And in preparing this book, I did a number of interviews with warning people, mainly producers, but some consumers over time, and asked them for their view on that. The general answer that I got was 6 months to 2 years. So that would be for strategic warning, not tactical warning. 6 months to 2 years. Vary significantly by observer. It can be quite short, and I can think of at least the Israeli case prior to peace with Israel, in which the Israeli military told national leaders they needed only 72 hours of strategic warning. In the Israeli case at the time, that was the amount of time that it took to mobilize the reserves. So it can be short, but often is cited as being considerably longer than that. It's not more than a presidential administration term for sure. Tactical warning, much shorter. I'm an old infantry guy, and I think of tactical warning. I think of somebody telling me the mortars are in the air, heading my way. Duck, get down. So tactical warning can be even seconds, minutes, hours, maybe a few days. So tactical warning is considerably shorter than strategic warning. A new time frame here that I think I anyway don't fully understand is cyber warning. So we've got cyber attacks associated with military actions and so on. We've now got cyber going on in the case of Ukraine and so on. And we don't really know, I think, at least in the public domain, how long an adequate period of warning will be in the cyber domain. It is clearly longer than the time it takes to hit a button and transmit electrons around the world. We know that in some cases, Chinese attacks on the Office of Personnel Management, for example, back in the 2014-15 period, that the actual preparation of the cyber attack took over a year. So the warning analysts here would be needing to look not at the actual attack itself, but at the preparations for it, and being able to understand what those preparations meant. So that is a tough task. The warning mission is a difficult one always. It's not getting any easier in the cyber world.
John, what are some causes for the failure in dealing with senior policymakers?
There are a number of them, but I think we can summarize them in a few ways. And perhaps the best way to start with that is to talk about what John Byrd, my first boss as a National Intelligence Officer for Warning, told me early on in my time with him. He said there are three important things in the warning business. First is good intelligence collection. No surprise there. Secondly, you need to analyze what's going on. So good analysis. Again, not terribly surprising. But the third thing that he emphasized was communication, was persuasion. He said that a key to the warning business is being able to persuade senior decision maker that something is happening that's sufficiently important to warrant a senior level decision. So, and persuasiveness in this case does not mean that you're advocating a specific policy decision. Persuasion means that you're trying to convince a decision maker to think about making a decision. And the decision there can be either to make a decision or not. So the key to that third component, and Byrd told me in no uncertain terms that he thought that the third one, persuasion, was the most important and the area in which warning usually failed. The key to that is the development of personal relationships of trust. And by that, I mean the development of interactions between warning officials and those senior decision makers. And this is critical because decision makers that do not want to make costly decisions need to be sure that the people who are telling him they need to make costly decisions are people that they can trust. And a good example, I think, explains how this can work. I remember very early in my time with John Byrd, he came back to the office after being out away, and he talked about how he'd just had lunch with Al. And said to myself, rhetorically scratching my head, who in the world is this Al guy? Well, it turned out Al was the commandant of the Marine Corps, General Alfred Gray of the Marine Corps. And John Byrd used to have lunch with General Gray every couple of months. They would talk over situations in the world, and General Gray would tell John Byrd what was concerning to him. So what Byrd did in this case was establish a relationship of trust, so that if there was ever a critical situation that General Gray needed to know about, that General Gray was in a position where he would really know who this John Byrd fellow was and whether it was a good warning message or not. Well, there are lots of causes for distrust. So you want to create relationships of trust if you can, but we know too that distrust can be created for a number of reasons. Lack of confidence in the competence of warning officers. The warning messages are not very good, for example. There's a personal integrity issue that shows up periodically. One of the best ways to ruin a relationship of trust is to leak documents to the press or to even other intelligence analysts. And a critical one that I think we've seen in recent years, unfortunately, is the issue of political neutrality and objectivity. If a national leader does not trust the intelligence to be apolitical, that's pretty clearly going to damage relationship of trust. Another way that distrust can occur is situation in which warns excessively, and the excess warnings turn out to be incorrect. So this is a situation in which you have what's become known as a cry wolf syndrome, after the little boy with the sheep, sometimes known as the Chicken Little syndrome. The sky is falling in, a childhood story. So the idea here is that if you warn excessively, then people the consumers are not going to listen to you anymore. So it's critically important for warning people to be sure that the situations in which they actually issue a warning message are good ones. That doesn't mean that they have to wait to be certain. Indeed, if they wait to be certain that a situation is developing, then we're not talking warning anymore. We're talking history. So you need to make a trade-off in the warning business between being knowledgeable about a situation and making informed judgments about what might occur versus being excessive in one way or another. One way to handle the dry wolf syndrome is to provide opportunity warning judgments. So this is a situation in which you actually become welcome in policy circles by providing information about what might usefully be an opportunity to advance national interests. So in this case, again, the warning officer is not saying to policymakers, this is what you should do, but rather you're saying, here's a situation that provides you a potential opportunity to advance national interests. It's your choice whether you want to take advantage of that opportunity, and it's your choice how you might wish to do that. So those are important lessons.
John, finally, what steps need to be taken to revive and reestablish warning in the United States?
I think the first one is to recognize the mission. So I was discouraged and still am that the DNI Clapper abolished the position of National Intelligence Officer for Warning in 2011. We have in the intelligence community now a concept called anticipatory intelligence. I have to say, when I first heard that, I laughed because I thought that was an oxymoron. Intelligence is only about the future. It's only about anticipating. But it's crystal clear that anticipatory intelligence is not warning. So I think we really do need to think about what the warning mission is. I would recommend reestablishing a central location. The position of the NIO for warning within the National Intelligence Council worked well for over 20 years. And I think that reestablishing that position or something like it would be a good idea. So again, you would have in this case a central location that would be the place for a senior level warning message to emanate if it's not produced through the line analytic units. This organization also would be in charge of helping to develop additional warning methods over time. There should be, I think, as well, an increased linkage of the warning mission to counterintelligence and cyber operations. Both of those now are pretty clearly important pieces of the warning function. I would like to see a modification of ICD 203. So that's Intelligence Community Directive 203. That's the document produced by the director. It's known as Analytic Standards, which emphasizes the importance of putting evidence into intelligence messages. Now, in principle, that makes a lot of sense, but in the warning case, you're not, again, dealing with history. So the nature of warning is that it's unusually speculative, and you want to be able, without being punished bureaucratically, to be a little bit speculative in the warning area. I think also it's important to emphasize to new analysts in the training program that warning is a mission. And I think it's important to emphasize to junior and middle managers that the warning mission is important for all of their analysts. Intelligence analysts and managers have lots of incentives. They have a publisher perish kind of incentive structure now, and warning tends not to be something that reasonably can be done on a publisher perish kind of a basis. So we have some institutional disincentives for the warning mission that I think are unfortunate. My own guess is that we probably will not have a significant change in the warning structure in the U.S. intelligence community until we have a new significant warning failure. So what I would hope is that people who are thinking similarly to what I've just been talking about would have at the ready a series of reform messages after the next major warning failure.
Well, the book is called Strategic Warning Intelligence. It is a very insightful and instructive read. And I want to thank John Gentry for coming on today's program.
Thank you.